Talk about found-ups in a while, and I'm getting blinded by the morning sun here in Japan. You know, I'm driving a stick, holding an iPad, headed to my farm. It's 6 a.m. in the morning, so there isn't too many cars. That's the good news. What I want to talk about is actually bringing about the climate change solution using OSI. OSI being the Open Startup Innovation Framework. So OSI, basically, I believe, could save us from climate change. And how will it do that? Well, the whole premise, the whole solution that I have figured out and developed over the last 2 years is that if we fix the startup, we fix everything. Because, you see, companies come into being via a closed funding method called the startup. Recently, we had Eric Ries, sorry about this, I'm trying to switch gears with my right hand and drive. We've had Eric Ries basically talk about the lean startup. And the whole idea of the lean startup, basically, it's a philosophical pondering, or it's a realization that if you have enough capital, right? If you have enough capital, access to capital, you can pivot to success. Really, that's what he's saying. The lean startup basically says, if you have access to capital to keep developers and keep the business to going, right? You cannot fail. Now, he doesn't come out and say that because he's saying he doesn't talk about capital, but anyone with common sense realize it takes capital to pivot. It takes extreme amounts of capital to pivot, if you consider the cost. Now, what the Open Startup does is, number one, is it's not based on the closed access to capital model. And if you've watched my talks, I talk a lot about what an Open Startup is, but basically the Open Startup basically removes access to closed funding networks by introducing a new funder called the Archangel. And that new funder basically are the corporations that we launch as part of their mandate, is that they will invest up to 80%, because each one's going to be different, of their net profits into launching more open startups. What does that do is it actually removes the need of the closed Silicon Valley investor. Because if you think about it, you got 1,000 corporations investing 80% of their net profits, not making a few stakeholders rich, but actually launching more sustainable and CO2 neutral corporations. That's the new thing. That's the new thing I added to the Open Startup, is the realization that every open startup is going to be CO2 neutral, which means that they will not be, now that would suck if I hit that truck flying down here. Be like, in memory of Michael Trout launching the Open Startups, he died on his way here. So how will OSI save the world? Well, right now we are a snake eating its own tail, right? You've seen the old, Mayan symbol, the snake eating its own tail. Well, that is humanity. That representation of basically unsustainable. We are basically eating the resources of the future. And the problem is, what we're trying to do is to convince governments to bring about the change that we want, right? Well, we have a fundamental problem with that, is because every politician, the current political model, is basically funded by who? These large, unsustainable, they're unsustainable globally, right? Resource unsustainable corporations that are basically funding their campaign. You look at, for example, the Monsantos, and you look at the Exxons and all these other large corporations that basically have the interest of a few stakeholders over the interest of the 99% of the rest of the world. Because when you have a paradigm where success equals access to capital, then you have things that are showing themselves now. For example, we have 1% of America owns 50% of the U.S. stocks and 40% of America. 1% basically owns America, right? So, because they're the only ones, they have access to capital, and that paradigm, success equals access to capital. If you have capital, you can pivot yourself to success. And that's taking the one paradigm and adding it to the new startup paradigm that they realized that Silicon Valley basically has enough money that we can't fail anymore. So we can keep launching many, many ideas, and that's the whole premise of Y Combinator and all these other incubators, that we can just keep flooding, and our select investors are the ones that are going to basically have a monopoly on it. And that's what we have, is a monopoly on startups. Well, what I do is I change that. I turn it on its head. That's why I have the I upside down using the exclamation mark. Is OSI, the Open Startup Innovation, basically says, no, we don't need you. We can use a new kind of crowdfunding that is based on a system that's already raised $1.3 billion, a traditional funding solution, and bring about the change that we need. And in the process, imagine if every company that we launch, and most of them are going to become subsidiaries of FoundUps, and I've talked about that. Basically, it's kind of like why you'd want to become a subsidiary of Google versus becoming your own. And anyone who does their research on, Google Buzz, which was a failure, or Google AdWords, which they bought for $40 million, and I think is a failure, or more recently Google Wave, which was another failure, right? Now, with all these failures, and there's plenty of others, did Google's share price go down? No, they didn't. Why? Because they have so much other things going on that, that it doesn't matter. They can have tons of failures. So imagine at OSI, at FoundUps Corp, we got literally thousands, 10,000, 1 million startups all going on. Does it matter if a few of ours failed? No, it doesn't matter. They're all independent. We're like Warren Buffett. Go do your thing. When you get done of it, we'll put another CEO and you can come do another one. You can keep doing more and more startups. We provide the ecosystem. We provide an all-in-one solution, no incorporating, no nothing needed. And the bottom line, why our system is so amazing, is that basically the companies we launch are all carbon neutral. They all mandate that they will not support pork barrel politics. They will not invest in any politician that is, or put any funding towards any government to bring about and to take back our government. Basically, if I'm right, which I know I'm right, within 10 to 20 years, the idea of the closed, selfish corporation will be ended, and what we'll have instead is what I call open corporations, corporations that are carbon neutral, corporations that don't invest in candidates, or don't try to manipulate the government for their own selfish needs, because that's what's going on now with Monsanto and a whole bunch of other corporations. They're basically manipulating governments globally with their billions of dollars to bring about the destruction of the planet for their needs. So you can read my letter to the president and former president of the Maldives, and I explain that to you. So I realized the other day, and it ironically was on the birthday of the president, Nasheed, who was the one who brought about democracy, well, for a short time to the Maldives, that I didn't realize. I watched the documentary on his birthday and came about this realization. My name is Michael Trout. I'm here driving and trying to talk because, I used to always do talks in the car, but an iPad is a lot harder to work with than a iPod. And just trying to share with you a potential, a vision that lacks funding that could bring about the change the world needs.